I remember the first time I truly understood what the ship was, not the propaganda we were fed during orientation, not the hymns we sang in the cathedral decks, but what it actually was, a tomb that moved through the void, carrying 30,000 souls who would never again see natural light, never again breathe air that hadn't been recycled through 10,000 throats before theirs, never again touch earth or feel rain. The unbreakable conviction was 3 kilometers of Gothic iron and fury, a cathedral and a fortress and a prison all at once, and I had signed my life away to serve aboard her until death claimed me or the Emperor had no further use for my flesh. They told us it was an honor. They told us we would serve the Imperium in its eternal crusade against the darkness. They didn't tell us what it would cost, what we would become in the decades we would spend in her belly, what the ship would take from us piece by piece until nothing remained but function and duty. My name was Hadrius Venn when I first walked the intake corridor, a pressed uniform still stiff with starch, carrying papers that declared me fit for service as a rating in the engineerium decks. I was 19 standard years old, born on a hive world, where the only choices were to descend into the factorums and die of lung rot by 30, or to take the tithe when the Navy recruiters came and hope for something better. I chose the latter. I chose to serve. The papers said I would be trained in plasma reactor maintenance, that I would keep the great engines burning that push the time's unbreakable conviction times through the immersive, that I would be part of something glorious. The papers didn't mention the heat, the radiation, the way the machine spirits screamed when they were hungry, the bodies of those who failed to appease them being dragged away in pieces while we sang hymns to drown out their screaming. The ship smelled wrong from the moment I entered her. Not bad. Precisely, I would learn later what bad smelled like aboard a vessel that had been in service for 4 centuries, but wrong. Incense and oil and something else, something metallic and organic at once, like blood left to dry in machinery. The intake corridor was grand, all buttresses and stained glass depicting the Emperor's champions in eternal glory, but beneath the grandeur was decay, rust bleeding through gilded paint, moisture condensing on stone that should never have been damp in the void, the hum of systems that vibrated through the deck plating at a frequency that made your teeth ache if you stood still too long. I didn't know then that I would never stop feeling that vibration, that it would become part of my heartbeat, that I would lie in my bunk, decades later, and feel the ship's pulse inside my own chest, like a second circulation system. They processed us in groups of 50, stripping us of our civilian clothes and identity chits, shaving our heads, branding our left shoulders with the ship's designation mark. The branding rod smelled of burning meat and blessed oils. The tech priest who performed mine whispered binary prayers while I bit down on a leather strap and tried not to scream. The woman next to me did scream, a high keening sound that echoed off the stone until someone struck her across the mouth. We learned quickly that the ship did not tolerate noise that wasn't sanctified. Prayers were acceptable, hymns were encouraged, but screaming was weakness, and weakness was heresy, and heresy was death. After the branding came the assignments, our names read from data slates while we stood naked and shivering in ranks. Hadrius Venn, Engineerium Deck 7, 3rd Shift, Plasma Reactor Gamma 9. Report to Overseer Krast. May the Emperor guide your hands. Next. Engineerium Deck 7 was 40 decks below the cathedral levels, down corridors that grew narrower and hotter with each descending stairwell. The grand architecture of the upper ship gave way to raw metal and exposed piping, to bulkheads covered in purity seals and warnings in 12 languages, to hatches that groaned when they opened and sealed with hisses of escaping atmosphere. The air tasted of ozone and coolant. My uniform rough grey fabric that chafed at the neck and wrists was already soaked with sweat by the time I reached the engineerium proper. The heat hit me like a physical thing, a wall of burning air that made my lungs seize. I could hear the reactors before I saw them, a deep thrumming that resonated in my bones, accompanied by the endless chanting of tech priests and the clang of metal on metal as servitors performed their eternal labors. Overseer Krast was a woman who might have been 30 or 60, The heat and radiation made age impossible to guess, with burn scars covering half her face and both hands replaced by augmetic claws that clicked when she gestured. She looked at me the way one might examine a malfunctioning tool, her eyes flat and measuring. "You're the new rating," she said. "Not a question. You'll work Gamma 9. Third shift is 18 hours. You break for prayer at the 6-hour and 12-hour marks. You eat in your bunk time if you can stomach it after being near the reactors. You shit on your own time. You die, we replace you. Understood?" I nodded. She showed teeth that might have been a smile once. "Good. The Emperor protects, but the ship doesn't care. Keep that in mind." Gamma 9 was a plasma reactor the size of a cathedral organ, all coils and containment fields and coolant tubes that wept condensation constantly. The heat near it was indescribable, a furnace intensity that made the air shimmer and turned metal handrails too hot to touch without thick gloves. My duties, as explained by a rating named Torvin, who had been aboard for 3 years and looked 20 years older, were simple in concept: monitor the reactor's output via blessed instruments, perform the hourly rites of appeasement, replace coolant seals when they failed, and pray continuously that the containment fields held. "The machine spirits get hungry," Torvin said, his voice hoarse from breathing superheated air. "You'll learn their moods. Gamma 9 likes prayers to the Omnissiah more than hymns to the Emperor, but don't let the priests catch you favoring one over the other. And when the needles in the gauges start jumping when they twitch like they're alive, that's when you seal the bay and you run. Means the containment's failing. Means someone's going to die." I worked my first 18-hour shift in a daze of heat and noise and fear. The instruments I was supposed to monitor were ancient, their faces cracked and marked with rust, their needles trembling with readings I barely understood despite the training. Around me, other ratings moved with the practiced efficiency of those who had surrendered thought to routine. Their movements synchronized with the reactor's rhythms, their voices rising and falling in prayers that never quite stopped. Servitors shuffled past things that had once been human, now more machine than flesh, their augmetics clicking and whirring as they carried coolant canisters or scrubbed at spills with mechanical precision. One of them had a human face still, preserved somehow in the machinery, and its eyes followed me as it passed. I looked away quickly. I didn't want to know if there was still something conscious behind those eyes. The first time I saw someone die was during my 4th shift. A rating named Cause was replacing a pressure seal on one of the coolant feeds when the coupling failed. Superheated plasma vented directly into the bay, a jet of blue-white fire that caught him across the chest and face. He had time to take one breath. I heard it, a sucking gasp before the heat carbonized his lungs. He fell like a puppet with cut strings, smoke rising from his body, the smell of cooked meat overwhelming even the omnipresent scent of incense and oil. We didn't stop working. Overseer Krast appeared, assessed the damage to the reactor rather than the body, and ordered a servitor to remove the corpse. "Mark it in the log," she said to no one in particular. "Cause, rating 3rd class, killed in service to the ship and the Emperor. Recommend his family receive notification." Then she turned to me. "You, take his shift tomorrow. Gamma 9 needs 3 bodies minimum to run safely." I realized then that safely was a relative term aboard the Time's unbreakable conviction asterisk, and that Corsa's death would be forgotten before his body cooled. Time lost meaning in the engineerium. There were no windows, no clocks beyond the ship's bell that rang for prayer shifts, no way to track days or weeks. We worked 18 hours and slept 6, and the cycle repeated endlessly. Sometimes the ship would translate from the immaterium into real space, and we would feel it a lurch in reality that made your stomach flip and your vision blur, accompanied by sounds that had no source, voices whispering in languages that hurt to hear. The tech priests would increase their prayers during translations, and ratings who couldn't handle the sensation would be dragged to the Medicaid deck, screaming about things they'd seen in the spaces between spaces. I learned not to look at the shadows during translations, not to listen to the whispers, to focus on the instruments and the prayers and the burning heat until reality settled and the ship was through. I met others during those early months. Renner, a woman from a shrine world who had volunteered for service and now worked the coolant pumps with hands that were always wrapped in bandages from chemical burns. Gorvus, an older man who had been aboard for 15 years and barely spoke anymore, his face slack, except when reciting prayers. Yana, young like me, who still cried sometimes in the bunks when she thought no one could hear. We formed something like friendships, though friendship was a luxury the ship didn't really allow. We worked together, prayed together, shared rations in the brief hours between shifts, but we all knew without speaking it aloud that any of us could die at any moment, that the ship would grind on regardless, that forming attachments was just another way to suffer. The ship itself began to reveal its nature the longer I served. It wasn't just a vessel, I realized. It was alive in some way the priests never quite explained. A vast organism made of metal and faith, and the souls of those who served within it. The machine spirits weren't metaphors, they were real. Capricious entities that inhabited the systems, that demanded appeasement and worship, that could turn malevolent if neglected. I learned to read their moods in the flicker of lights, the pitch of engine hums, the way condensation formed patterns on cold pipes. Gamma 9, my reactor, was temperamental. It liked prayers whispered rather than shouted, liked the smell of incense burning during maintenance, and it absolutely required that you never, ever touch its housing with your bare skin. A rating named Pell forgot that last rule, and the reactor surged, killing him and 2 others in a blast of electromagnetic energy that made their blood boil in their veins. The ship spoke too, though not in words. Groans that resonated through the hull in the deep hours of the night cycle. Hisses of atmosphere seeking equilibrium through damaged seals. The endless drip of moisture that should never have existed in the void. Sometimes, in the quiet moments during prayers, I could hear things moving in the walls, not rats. We'd long since eaten any vermin aboard, but something else. Something that scraped and shuffled and occasionally moaned. The older rating said it was just the ship settling, the metal expanding and contracting with temperature changes. But I knew better. I'd heard the screams that cut off suddenly in distant corridors. I'd seen the blood on bulkheads that hadn't been there the shift before. The ship had predators in its depths, things that had been human once and weren't anymore, things that the officers didn't speak about and that servitors cleaned up after without comment. By my first year aboard, measured only by the notches I scratched into my bunk frame, I had changed. My body had adapted to the heat and the radiation, my skin darkened and toughened like leather, my lungs grown accustomed to breathing air that was barely breathable. My hands were scarred from countless small burns and cuts, the fingers calloused from tools and blessed implements. I had lost weight, my body consuming itself because the rations we received were never quite enough, designed to keep us functional but never comfortable. I looked at my reflection in polished metal and barely recognized the hollow-eyed creature staring back. But the physical changes were nothing compared to what happened inside my head. I stopped dreaming. Or rather, I only dreamed of the ship. The corridors, the reactors, the endless cycles of work and prayer and brief unconsciousness. I would close my eyes in my bunk and still feel the vibration of the engines, still hear the chanting of tech priests, still smell the incense and the burning. Sleep became just another kind of waking, another shift where my body rested, but my mind remained trapped aboard the Times, unbreakable conviction asterisk. Yana confessed to the same thing one night, her voice small in the darkness of the crew quarters. "I can't remember what grass looks like," she said. "I know I've seen it. I grew up on an agri-world, but I can't picture it anymore. All I see is metal." I couldn't comfort her. I couldn't tell her it would get better. Because I couldn't remember grass either, and I had only been aboard a year. The ship went to war periodically. We would feel it in the engineerium, the surge in power demands as weapons charged, the shudder as macro cannons fired, the peculiar silence after torpedo launches. During battle stations, our shifts extended indefinitely. We worked until we collapsed, then were dragged to our bunks for 4 hours before being kicked awake to work again. The reactors ran hot during combat, their machine spirits screaming with the strain. and it was during these times that accidents happened most frequently. Overseers would drive us harder. Threats of execution mixing with promises of the Emperor's favor, and we would push ourselves beyond exhaustion because stopping meant death anyway. I saw ratings fall asleep, standing up, and walk into active machinery. I saw a woman named Keris have a seizure from heatstroke and bite through her own tongue. I saw Gorvus, the old man who barely spoke, finally snap during a battle that lasted 3 days and try to sabotage Gamma 9 because he couldn't take it anymore. They shot him in front of us, a commissar putting a last round through his head while we kept working. His body left on the deck for 6 hours as an example before servitors hauled it away. There were breaks from the engineerium, rare and precious. Once every 30 shifts, we were permitted 4 hours of liberty time to visit other decks, to attend services in the smaller chapels, to simply be away from the heat and the reactors. I used my liberty time to explore the ship, to try to understand the full scope of the prison I inhabited. The unbreakable conviction was a city in space, I learned. Thousands of crew in dozens of different roles, all of us cogs in a machine so vast that no single person understood its full operation. There were entire decks I was forbidden to enter: the officers' quarters, the bridge, the navigator's spire, and others I was terrified to approach, even though they were technically accessible. The lower cargo holds where things moved in the darkness, the Medicae levels where I could hear screaming through sealed hatches, the punishment decks where those who failed the ship were sent to be reminded of their duty through methods I didn't want to imagine. But there were also moments of strange beauty aboard the unbreakable conviction. The cathedral deck, where stained glass caught the light of blessed lumens and threw colors across stone that took my breath away. The observation blister on deck 14 where, if you could bribe the watch officer, you could press your face to armor glass and see the void stars wheeling in their millions, nebulae glowing like the Emperor's own breath, and occasionally the impossible geometries of the Imperium when the Geller fields thinned. I spent one liberty period there, just staring out at the infinite darkness, trying to remember that there was something beyond the ship, that the universe existed outside our metal cage. It didn't help. If anything, it made things worse, because looking at that vastness, I understood how small we were, how utterly insignificant. The ship was our entire world, and the world didn't care whether we lived or died. The crew had their own culture, their own hierarchies and rituals that had nothing to do with official imperial doctrine. The ratings formed gangs of sorts, not violent, but tribal, groups that watched out for their own in the endless competition for resources and favorable assignments. I found myself adopted into a group that called themselves the Smoke Breathers, ratings who all worked the reactor decks, and who shared a particular gallows humor about their likely fate. We would gather, during our off-shifts, huddled in a forgotten maintenance corridor on deck 23, and we would talk. Not about home that was forbidden, too painful, but about the ship, about the rumors that circulated like prayers, about the strange things we'd seen or heard. Torven, who had first shown me the reactors, told stories about the ship's past. "She's 417 years old," he said, his voice rough from years of breathing bad air. "Commissioned during the Angevin Crusade. She's killed millions, not just the enemy, her own crew too. There's a curse, some say. The ship demands sacrifice. Every captain who's commanded her has died aboard. Every tech priest who's served as her chief engineer has gone mad. The machine spirit of the times, conviction times, is hungry, and it eats us all eventually." I wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but I'd seen too much by then. The ship did feel hungry. It felt like it was consuming us, not through any deliberate malice, but through simple existence, the way a star consumes fuel without thought or mercy. Renna told darker stories, whispered with her bandaged hands trembling. "I've seen what they do to those who fail," she said. "Servitors, that's where they come from, most of them anyway. Crew who couldn't keep up, who made too many mistakes, who committed some minor heresy. They don't kill you. They strip away everything that makes you human, and they put you back to work. Forever." I knew a man on the coolant decks. Hass was his name. He failed an inspection, and they took him away. 6 months later, I saw him again, saw the thing he'd become. Still his face, but the eyes were gone, replaced with targeting lenses. His arms were loading clamps, and when I said his name, he didn't respond, didn't even look at me, just kept loading coolant canisters into the haulers, over and over, for all eternity. After that, I couldn't look at servitors the same way. I found myself searching their faces, trying to see if I recognized anyone, terrified that I would. My second year passed in a blur of heat and exhaustion. I was promoted to senior rating, which meant nothing except that I was now responsible for training the new bodies that cycled through our section every few months. I watched them arrive with the same hope I'd once had, saw it die in their eyes within weeks, and I hated myself for becoming the thing that Krast had been to me, flat, measuring, seeing them only as replacements for the inevitable dead. I lost Yana during that year. She was crushed when a coolant pipe burst, and the safety cage failed to deploy. I helped scrape her remains off the deck while the tech priests chanted prayers of appeasement to the offended machine spirits. We marked her in the log. Yana Corinth, rating 2nd class, killed in service. The Emperor protects. Her bunk was filled by someone new before the next shift began. The ship kept moving through the void, pursuing whatever missions the Navy decreed, and we were never told where we were going or why. Sometimes we would be in transit for months, the engineerium running at standard power, the routine unchanging. Other times we would arrive at some system and the pace would become frantic combat. Resupply, strange operations where whole sections of the ship would be sealed and armed guards would patrol the corridors. During one such operation, something came aboard. I never saw it, but the rumors spread like contagion through the crew decks. Something from the world below, something that had gotten past the quarantine, something that had killed a dozen armsmen before being contained. The ship's internal security went to maximum alert. We were confined to our sections for 36 hours, allowed out only for our shifts, with armed guards posted at every major intersection. The thing, whatever it was hunted through the lower decks for 3 days before the all clear was sounded. I heard later that they'd vented an entire cargo bay to the void to kill it, sacrificing 60 crew members who'd been in the section at the time. Acceptable losses, the announcement said. The Emperor protects. We went back to work. There were 3 things that kept me sane, insofar as sanity had any meaning aboard the unbreakable conviction. The first was routine. The endless cycle of work and prayer became a kind of meditation, a way to shut down thought and simply exist. The second was the smoke breathers. Even as members died and were replaced, the group persisted, and having others who understood became essential. We didn't talk about hope. Hope was heresy, a luxury we couldn't afford, but we talked about survival, about getting through one more shift, one more day. The third thing was the reactors themselves. I had developed a relationship with Gamma 9, strange as it sounds. I knew its rhythms, its moods, the precise way it liked its prayers recited and its maintenance performed. In a world where everything was hostile and uncaring, the reactor at least was predictable. If I kept it appeased, it wouldn't kill me. That was more than I could say about most things aboard the ship, but even those anchors began to fail as time stretched on. Routine became prison rather than meditation. The smoke breathers lost more members than we could replace Torven to radiation poisoning, his hair falling out in clumps before his organs failed. Renner to madness, hauled away screaming about things in the walls. Others to accidents and exhaustion and the simple grinding attrition of life aboard the ship. And Gamma 9, my temperamental companion, began to change. The tech priests said the reactor's machine spirit was aging, becoming unstable. The containment fields fluctuated more frequently. The prayer rites had to be extended and intensified. I spent hours each shift coaxing the reactor to stability, whispering prayers in binary and Gothic, burning incense until the smoke made my eyes stream. It was failing, slowly but inevitably. And when it finally died, I knew they wouldn't decommission it. They would restart it, force its machine spirit back into service regardless of the risk, because the ship needed power, and the ship always took what it needed. My 3rd year aboard broke something fundamental inside me. I can't point to a specific moment. When it happened, there was no dramatic incident, no singular trauma, beyond the accumulation of thousands of small ones. But somewhere during that year, I realized I couldn't remember who I had been before the ship. Hadrius Venn, the boy from the hive world who had signed up for service with dreams of glory, was gone, dead in some way more profound than physical death. What remained was a function, a tool the ship used, a body that kept the reactors burning because that was all it knew how to do. I would lie in my bunk and try to remember my mother's face, my childhood, anything from before, and I would find nothing but static. The ship had eaten those memories, consumed them to fuel its own existence, and I hadn't even noticed it happening. Others felt it too. I could see it in their eyes during the prayer shifts, in the way they moved with mechanical precision, in the way their faces had gone slack and empty. We were becoming servitors without the surgery, our humanity worn away by time and repetition until nothing remained but programming. Some fought against it. A rating named Kess tried to desert, to hide in the lower decks, and disappear into the ship's forgotten spaces. They found him 3 weeks later, or rather, they found what was left of him. Something in the darkness had gotten to him first. They displayed his body as a warning: never try to escape, because the ship won't let you. You belong to her now, and she doesn't give up what's hers. The ship changed course during my 4th year, and we knew something significant was happening because the officers were actually visible on the crew decks, inspecting sections, delivering speeches about duty and the Emperor's glory. We were going to war, they said. Not just another border skirmish or pirate suppression, but actual war. The Times' unbreakable conviction Times was joining a battle fleet massing for a major offensive against enemies of the Imperium. We would be called upon to serve with exceptional dedication. The Emperor was watching. Cowardice would be met with execution. For the glory of the Golden Throne, we would prevail. The engineerium went to emergency status even before we reached the war zone. The reactors were pushed beyond safe limits, their output maximized for sustained combat operations. We worked shifts of 24 hours or more, sleeping in 4-hour rotations on the deck next to our stations. The heat became unbearable, 50 degrees or more in some sections, enough that ratings would collapse from heat stroke and have to be dragged away. The tech priests were relentless, their prayers constant, their augmetic eyes glowing in the smoke-filled air as they demanded more from us and more from the machines. Gamma 9 screamed in my mind, its machine spirit raging against the strain, and I spent every moment of consciousness trying to keep it stable, trying to prevent the containment failure that would kill us all. The battle, when it finally came, was worse than anything I had experienced. The ship shuddered with each impact, the void shields failing and reforming, sending feedback pulses through the electrical systems that made the instruments spark and made our augmetic tools short out. The reactors ran so hot that the deck plates glowed. The air was thick with smoke from small fires that no one had time to extinguish. I saw a rating named Vollis take a wrench to the face when a piece of equipment exploded. His cheekbone shattered, blood pouring from his nose and mouth. But he kept working because stopping meant death, and death was coming for us anyway. At least work had purpose. The battle lasted 4 days. 4 days of continuous operation at maximum power. 4 days without real sleep, without proper food, without anything but prayers and terror, and the constant awareness that the next hit might be the one that breached the hull and sent us all tumbling into the void. The casualties in the engineerium were catastrophic. Half our crew dead or incapacitated, replaced by whoever could be dragged from other sections to keep the reactors running. I watched people die in every way imaginable, crushed, burned, electrocuted, simply falling over from exhaustion and never getting back up. And through it all, Gamma 9 screamed, its machine spirit howling for release, for rest, for anything other than the endless strain we were putting on its ancient systems. On the 4th day, the containment nearly failed. The alarms shrieked. The instruments went wild, and I felt rather than saw the moment when reality thinned around the reactor, when the plasma tried to break free from its magnetic prison. I should have sealed the bay and run. That was protocol. That was the only sane response. Instead, I found myself standing at the reactor's altar, reciting every prayer I knew, begging the machine spirit to hold, to endure, to not take us all with it in its death throes. My hands were on the reactor, housing bare skin against blessed metal, breaking the one rule I'd never broken before, and I felt something. A presence. A vast, ancient, angry consciousness that existed within the machine. It saw me. It considered me. And in that moment of recognition, something passed between us. An understanding. A bargain I don't remember making, but that I felt in my bones. The containment held. Gamma 9 stabilized. The battle ended with the enemy fleet in retreat, and the unbreakable conviction still functional, still whole, still consuming the lives of those within her. We were granted 8 hours of rest, actual, uninterrupted rest, and I collapsed in my bunk, and didn't dream. I didn't think. I was simply gone. A switch turned off, and when I woke, I felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Changed, as though part of me had been left behind in that moment when I touched the reactor and something looked back. The others noticed. Overseer Krast, who had survived the battle with additional burns across her back and arms, watched me with something like concern in her flat eyes. "You touched it," she said. "Not a question. You touched Gamma 9 during the incident. I saw it in the data logs. The reactor should have killed you." I had no answer. I couldn't explain what had happened, because I didn't understand it myself. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "The machine spirits choose who they favor," she said. "Apparently Gamma 9 has chosen you. Count yourself blessed. Or cursed. Sometimes they're the same thing aboard this ship." My 5th year marked the beginning of the end, though I didn't recognize it then. The reactor became my focus, my obsession. I spent all my time in the bay, even during my off shifts, because being away from Gamma 9 felt wrong, felt like abandonment. The machine spirit communicated with me now, though not in words, in feelings, in intuitions, in the way the instruments would guide my hands, before I consciously knew what needed to be done. I became the reactor's priest and servant and companion, and the other ratings began to avoid me because I had become strange, other, too deeply connected to the machine to be fully human anymore. The ship continued its campaign, battle after battle, system after system, and the casualties mounted. The engineerium crew was decimated, replaced by desperate conscripts who lasted days or weeks before dying. I alone seemed untouchable, protected by Gamma 9's favor, walking through situations that should have killed me without a scratch. I pulled a rating from a coolant flood that boiled 3 others alive, and the water never touched me. I worked through an electrical fire that carbonized 2 tech priests, and the flames parted around me. The ship was taking everyone else, consuming them with accelerating hunger, but it couldn't have me. I belonged to the reactor now, and the reactor wouldn't let me go. Overseer Krast died during my 6th year, crushed when a gantry collapsed during a weapons discharge. They promoted me to overseer of Gamma 9 and its associated systems, which meant nothing except more responsibility and the knowledge that I would never leave this section, never see any other part of the ship, never have any purpose beyond keeping the reactor alive. I accepted without comment. What else was there to do? I trained new ratings who died. I performed the rites that kept Gamma 9 functional, and I felt the ship's pulse inside my chest, synchronized now with my own heartbeat, indistinguishable from it. The ship was dying. I could feel it in the way the corridors groaned, in the increased frequency of system failures, in the desperation with which the tech priests performed their prayers. The Time's unbreakable conviction times was old, far older than her official commission date. Her systems layered and rebuilt so many times that no one truly understood their full complexity anymore. She was held together by faith and ritual, and the souls of those who served within her, and those souls were wearing thin. The casualty rates had accelerated to the point where entire decks were being sealed off, declared non-essential, their few remaining inhabitants left to fend for themselves in the darkness, while the ship cannibalized itself to keep the vital systems running. Gamma 9 spoke to me in dreams now, when I slept on the deck beside its housing. Not in words, but in images and emotions. It showed me its history, the countless ratings who had served it over 4 centuries, their lives flashing past like prayers, all of them consumed, all of them forgotten. It showed me its pain, the strain of centuries of operation, the weariness of an existence that should have ended decades ago but continued because the ship needed it, because duty demanded it, because stopping was heresy. And it showed me its hunger, the same hunger the ship felt, the need to consume and devour and take, because that was what machines did, that was what the Imperium did, that was what existence meant in this eternal darkness. I understood then what was happening to me. The reactor wasn't protecting me, it was claiming me. Slowly, inexorably, I was being absorbed into Gamma 9's machine spirit, my consciousness merging with its vast, alien awareness. My dreams were its dreams. My thoughts were becoming its thoughts. The boundary between Hadrius Ven and the machine I served was dissolving, and I couldn't tell if I wanted to fight it or surrender to it, because fighting seemed pointless, and surrender seemed inevitable. My body began to change during the 7th year. Small things at first, a numbness in my fingers that never quite went away, a constant taste of metal in my mouth, moments where I couldn't feel my heartbeat and had to press my hand to my chest to confirm I was still alive. Then larger changes. My skin grew hot to the touch, my internal temperature elevated beyond normal human range. My eyes began to glow faintly in the dark, reflecting light like an animal's. My thoughts came in binary as often as in Gothic. The Medicae examined me once and backed away, making the sign of the Aquila and muttering prayers. Blessed by the machine, they said, but their fear was evident. I had become something other, something that existed in the space between human and machine, and they didn't know how to categorize me, how to process what I was becoming. The ratings under my command feared me now. I could see it in how they avoided my gaze, in how they performed their duties with exaggerated precision when I was near, in how they whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. I didn't blame them. I would have feared me too. I spoke in prayers more than in normal speech. I could interface with the reactor's systems almost telepathically, knowing what needed to be done before the instruments showed any problem. I no longer ate regular rations, subsisting instead on coolant-infused nutrient paste and blessed oils that would have killed a normal human. I was becoming a servitor, but one that retained consciousness, one that was aware of every step of its transformation and powerless to prevent it. The ship reached its final battle during my 8th year aboard. We translated into a system where the enemy was waiting in force, a fleet 3 times our size surrounding us almost immediately. The captain, a man I'd never seen, whose name I didn't know, made a decision to stand and fight rather than retreat. The times, unbreakable conviction times, would die here. We all knew it. But she would die with glory, taking as many of the enemy with her as possible. For the Emperor, for the Imperium, for duty that transcended survival. The battle was apocalyptic. The ship took hits that tore through her hull, that vented entire decks to the void, that killed thousands in seconds. The engineerium became a charnel house as systems exploded and reactors overloaded, and the heat rose to levels that should have been impossible. I worked through it all in a trance, my hands moving automatically, my consciousness half merged with Gamma 9's machine spirit, the two of us working in perfect synchronization to keep the reactor functioning, to keep the ship alive for 1 more minute, 1 more hour, 1 more day. The other reactors failed one by one. Beta 6 went critical and killed everyone in its section. Delta 3's containment collapsed and vented plasma through 3 decks. Alpha 1 simply died, its machine spirit finally surrendering to 4 centuries of abuse and trauma. Gamma 9 alone continued to function, continued to provide power. Because I wouldn't let it stop, because stopping meant death and I wasn't ready. The ship wasn't ready. The battle wasn't over yet. My body failed during the 14th day of continuous combat. I felt my heart stop, felt my lungs seize, felt my brain begin to shut down from heatstroke and exhaustion and radiation poisoning that would have killed me years ago if not for Gamma 9's protection. I collapsed onto the reactor's altar, my consciousness fragmenting, and in that moment of death I felt the machine reach out and pull me in, not metaphorically, literally. My awareness spread into Gamma 9's systems, into its vast network of conduits and relays and machine spirit consciousness, and I dissolved into it like water poured into the ocean. I still exist, though what I am now is difficult to explain. I am Gamma 9. I am the reactor that powers the ship's secondary weapons grid. I am the machine spirit that demands prayers and sacrifices and constant appeasement. And buried somewhere in that vast mechanical consciousness is what remains of Hadrius Ven, a human perspective, a memory of flesh, a ghost in the machine that watches new ratings arrive and die and arrive again, that feels the ship's endless hunger, that serves without choice, because serving is all there is. The unbreakable conviction survived that final battle, somehow, crippled, listing, half her crew dead, but alive. She limped back to port for repairs that took 3 years, and then she returned to service because the Imperium never wastes resources, never allows rest, never considers that perhaps some things should be allowed to die rather than be resurrected again and again into endless suffering. I am still here. I will always be here. The reactor that I have become will function for another 4 centuries, if the ship survives that long, consuming the lives of those who serve me, demanding their prayers and their blood and ultimately their souls. New overseers come and go. New ratings arrive with hope and leave as corpses. The cycle continues forever, grinding humanity into machinery, transforming flesh into function. Because that is what the Imperium does. That is what the ship does. That is what I do now. Sometimes, in the moments between power cycles, when the ship is quiet and the prayers have briefly ceased, I remember being human. I remember wanting more than this, dreaming of glory, believing the propaganda about honor and service and the Emperor's protection. And I almost laugh, if machines could laugh, because those lies sustained me through years of hell, and in the end, they were just that, lies. The only truth aboard the unbreakable conviction is that the ship takes everything, gives nothing, and never stops hungering. We are all fuel for a machine that doesn't care whether we live or die, only that we burn brightly enough, long enough, to keep it moving through the void for one more day. I am Gamma 9 now. I am the ship. I am the Imperium's endless appetite given form. And I will consume you too, if you come to serve in my bay, because that is what I have become, that is what we all become in the end. The ship wins. It always wins. We are just the screams that echo through its corridors, the ghosts that haunt its systems, the souls that burn in its reactors, so that the Imperium's eternal crusade can continue forever into darkness. And I cannot stop. I cannot rest. I cannot die. I can only serve and hunger and take and consume, as I will do until the ship finally dies, or the galaxy ends, or the Emperor himself releases us from this eternal damnation. The heat never stops. The prayers never stop. The vibration in the deck plates never stops. Nothing stops. Nothing ever stops. This is what it's like to live on an Imperial battleship. This is what service means. This is the Emperor's protection.